Your conference really just blows me away. The breadth and depth of content. We're really happy to be here. You're locked away in a room by yourself, pounding away on the keyboard, hanging out with the voices in your head, which most times should get you a prescription for some kind of medication. But and we have strong chapters now in Italy, the UK, and Ireland. So everyone out there in Bulgaria and surrounding countries, get going, start a chapter.
Yes, because I want to hear stories that are, the folklore and whatnot from the Eastern Europe that are your stories, but told in your words. That's one of the reasons why I think horror is stretching farther today, is because there's such an outreach, and I just love hearing stories from other countries, from the, in the words of someone from that country.
And Eastern Europe has such a rich body of folklore. And you see that now. Again, something that has a lot of horror elements, but I wouldn't describe as explicitly horror, is the popularity of The Witcher right now. Which is all based on Polish myths.
Yeah, and it's fantasy, and that's fantasy, but it's definitely dark fantasy.
Yeah, there's definitely some horror elements to that.
I visited Romania for a very long tour, and got to learn a lot about the Strigoi, and that's something, we get a lot of, Dracula, and we get a lot of vampire stories, but specifically something I want to read something specifically like Strigoi, and maybe, about a village there. And it was just so interesting, how they have such a, strong religious beliefs there, but then they also have this belief of the Strigoi.
But all those scholarships, we do a scholarship for nonfiction writers. We do one for poets. We do one for emerging female writers. And so there are a lot of opportunities for new writers to come in and hopefully find a way to take their career to the next level. If it's getting a scholarship and using those funds for education, or if it's using the resources that we offer, or the networking opportunities. And we're really growing as an org and really trying to listen to our members and potential members as to what would be valuable to them. And just give you a little background on how quickly we've grown. I became admin for the org 10 years ago. We had 350 members, almost entirely in the United States. Today we're at just under 2,000 members, and we're in 28 countries. We just had our first member from Qatar join, which was kind of cool. And as that growth continues, we're finding more ways to support members outside of the United States. And that's very important to us because we're the Horror Writers Association, not the Horror Writers of America. And that's actually something that people still put on things. I still get correspondences where people think HWA means Horror Writers of America, but we're international. We want to support those international movements. Horror as a genre is so robust in countries around the world. I mean, again, we're seeing, the chapters in India, Italy, and the UK are just growing massively. But there's such good horror in Eastern Europe. There's phenomenal horror in Asia. I would love if we could get a Korea chapter.
That would be amazing. And right now, I feel like international horror is really hot. I mean, that could just be my own personal opinion, but hearing horror stories from other people's voices, I think and stories about myths and from other places, and you can get an idea for that just by what's on TV, what's on Netflix, because Netflix isn't going to show something that's boring. It doesn't last very long, but there's shows on Netflix. Like you said with the international, the biggest thing in the United States for the past 2 weeks has been this Korean show, Squid Game. It's on Netflix. And there's that German, The Dark.
That's
on. That's a series, and there's a lot of like Norwegian horror I've been watching. Like, to me, I find it fascinating. Like, being in age, someone's from Asian descent and Asian culture. I find Eastern European folklore and Anglo folklore, I find it very fascinating, and I love hearing stories, about the Selkies in Ireland, and maybe I'm not saying it right, but I just find those kinds of stories fascinating, and I wish that there were more of those kinds of stories out there, from those authors that live there and can tell that story, like not like somebody from here can. Like you were saying, you can tell right away if it's not
authentic. Yeah.
It's just when I was in Romania, and going through the Carpathian Mountains and the forest, which is like enormous, has a huge bear population. And I was thinking to myself, wow, if I lived someplace like this, I could go on and on about stories of things in the forest, the witch that lives in the forest, but I don't know the culture well enough, didn't grow up there, so maybe they already have a witch story, but let's expand on that. Let's get it in front of American viewers, American eyes to read.
Because different cultures have different building blocks for stories, right? Different structural scaffolding for stories. And so sometimes that takes you a moment to adjust to, but in that moment of adjustment is where part of the magic happens, because it knocks you off back, puts you back on your heels, and you're not operating with your preconceived notions. You're not going into it, I know what this is going to be like. No. Smacks you in the face and says, pay attention, and that's great. So the fact that we can get it from everywhere, and anybody, if they're smart enough, determined enough, and good enough, can put their work, they can express their art to the largest audience possible ever in human history, right? I mean, the darkness of the human condition, the things we fear, and the things that cause us to suffer are always fertile compost for these seeds of stories to grow from.
I think the thing that would be interesting with trying to tell a horror story about the COVID pandemic, once we're, knock on wood, hopefully past it, is that there's actually already been so many iconic stories playing in that space. I mean, how do you tell that story and not retread The Stand or The Walking Dead?
Contagion.
Yeah.
Chuck Wendig's The Wanderers, more recently.
I was reading that when the pandemic broke out, and I was like, I know you wrote this 2 years ago, Chuck, but don't do this.
Yeah, I tend to, like you said, I don't often think about it beforehand, but I definitely tend to write about my own fears. Because first off, something has to, I personally, in order for me to write an effective story, have to be creeped out by the idea that I'm having, or disturbed in some way. And that disturbed, what I mean is not like, oh, look how gory it is, but again, like I said earlier, I have written a few things about just the fears that come with parenthood, because those ideas disturb me. And if I'm having that response to it, then I think I can convey it well. Whereas there are things that are like subgenres of horror that don't scare me. Like a lot of people get really freaked out by home invasion stories. And, I bounced for years with Tess. I've fought amateur mixed martial arts. I used to do amateur powerlifting. I don't have that sense of powerlessness that I think some people do with the idea of home invasion. I mean, if somebody invaded my home, they'd probably still kill me. It just doesn't scare me as much as I think it does with other people. So, whereas, having that kind of background, I do, like, I do get creeped out easier with the idea of supernatural stuff. My own thoughts on the existence of ghosts aside, like, I'm able to get in that mindset of like, man, if I'm in a dark, empty hallway and I hear something sigh from the black at the other end, that bothers me. I'm able to get into that mindset.
See, I do the same thing. My wife is a huge true crime serial killer fan. If it's in that genre, she loves it. And she will slowly has been getting into watching the supernatural stuff. I like watching and writing about the supernatural stuff, and my wife likes the mundane stuff, and the reason why is, as she puts it, if it's mundane, I can fight it. We can call cops. We can hit it with a baseball bat. Supernatural, you can't find no ghost. And it's like,
yeah, and that's kind of that like sense of powerlessness.
What scares me, like the supernatural stuff, doesn't scare me. I love it. I've loved it since I was a little kid. It's the monsters that humans can be when they turn other people into objects. Right? That's one of those things that scare me. And having seen the results of that so often. So
yeah. And I've never really thought about that before, but I mentioned powerlessness, and we're kind of talking about that, like the claustrophobia when diving, or the monstrousness of society, or the intangible thing at the end of the hall. Like that's kind of a key element, I think, to horror, is that what probably draws that line sharper between that and other genres is the sense of powerlessness. Like you can have a serial killer story that's a horror story, or a serial killer story that's a mystery thriller. And I think the difference is that your character in the mystery thriller will have some power, whereas your character in the horror story will be solely at the mercy of the killer.
Yeah, nothing like feeling like a small furry animal with this frightened rabbit fear.
Yeah.
It's like, I think most people have read Stephen King's The Shining, and if you ask people, everyone I've asked, to a person says the scariest part of that book is the topiary scene, and it's maybe a page, and it is just, it gives you the winter shins.
And that's a great example too of how something can work in one medium and not another. Because when they did the 1997 miniseries, they did the topiary scene, and it's laughable.
Yeah.
In the book, it is frightening.
Was it Daniel Oski, the guy that did House of Leaves? There's a scene like that, and all it's doing is...
Yeah, no, he's definitely a master at that. I think for me it was... I recently just thought about this the other day, was in the Silver Bullet, when he's hiding under the cans, the aluminum. I don't know how many of you read that, but he's hiding under the aluminum cans, and the priest, he knows the priest now is the werewolf, and he's so close and up in his face, and he can almost feel his breath or whatever. And I have that fear for some reason of like where I'm hiding and someone's right in front of me, and that I don't know if it's like a claustrophobia thing or the fear of being caught kind of a thing, but and I notice that I sometimes will use that also when I'm writing stories, and it just pops up, and I don't do it intentionally, but it will just pop up. But yeah, some people are really good at writing that. It always freaks me out whenever I come across a story that has that hiding element, and the monster, whoever the bad person is right
There's
there.
one that harkens back to the shadows in your bedroom when you were a kid.
Yeah.
It's that primal fight, flight, or freeze thing that goes on, and your body's already half asleep, and it's already halfway to freeze. Yeah, and you're like, please let me run, please let me run.
Yeah, which is kind of, horror works best when it's recreating a dream state, I think, for you. I think we're legitimately running out of time now. So for anyone watching today, thank you for joining, and thanks for the great questions. Feel free to write me at admin@horror.org for more information about the org, or for information about any of the works we discussed today and where to find them, including our own.